Well, good morning, everybody. Those of you that are watching, this is Saturday morning, and we have reached January 20th. And my regular update on the weather here in Nashville, Tennessee. We've got probably 5 or 6 inches of snow still on the ground, and the temperature is in the single digits. And doesn't seem to be letting up this weekend, so I'm not sure about school on Monday. Because as I've mentioned in an earlier episode, we here in the South depend on warm weather, sunshine to melt the snow. We do not use trucks and salt and sand and all the things you use up north. And all the hills and the hollers and the roads in the back areas covered up by trees. My road, which is out in the sun, is completely still covered with snow. So I am sure that those back roads are completely covered with snow as well. And of course, they get packed down and temperature drops, turns to ice. So it's a mess. Anyway, today is episode number 9. And as you know, we always begin with a question. And this is a longer question. It reads, in the face of seemingly so much incriminating evidence, especially all the evidence that's dumped on the public at first about Oswald, was there any exculpatory evidence? Was there any evidence that said he didn't do it that would have made a trial for Lee Harvey Oswald tricky? I get asked this question by my students all the time because in the initial rush, the evidence that is being, that the government is publicizing makes it look like an open and shut case. And then when we'll cover this in a later episode, when the district attorney of Dallas comes out and gives a point-by-point speech in a press conference of all the reasons why he believes Lee Harvey Oswald would have been convicted at trial. This is after his death. It looks like, when an authority figure such as that comes out and says that, of course, there's no defense. Oswald is dead. He can't defend himself. There's no defense attorney arguing counterpoints. It just, in the minds of the American people, especially in the aftermath of something so terrible, they wanted to believe that the killer had been caught. And it looked pretty bad for him. I've got a few images up here on this screen. They won't make a lot of sense to you now, but they will later. The top left screen is an inventory of evidence that was discovered or found at Oswald's rooming house and at his home. It's just inventoried there. And I want you to take special notice of the third item down from the top, which is camera Minox. Minox is in quotation marks. That's a special kind of camera. All right. And we'll talk more about that later. May not be exculpatory evidence, but it is certainly evidence that Oswald is more than the public is being led to believe he is. Another piece of evidence, very intriguing, is directly beneath that, the city of Dallas long distance receipt there, where from the jail, Oswald made one phone call. And of course, they record the call and they write down the number, they dial it for you. And you'll see the name and the city, Raleigh, North. First of all, the person calling is Lee Harvey Oswald, as you can see there. And the city is Raleigh, North Carolina, and there's a phone number there. And then there's a person that he's trying to call. His name is John Hurt. This is another very intriguing piece of evidence. Now, the phone call was never completed. There was no answer. But just the fact that Oswald, who still has not been appointed an attorney or given an attorney, instead of calling an attorney or calling a relative, uses his one phone call to make a collect phone call to John Hurt. And that may not mean anything now, but this is another piece of intriguing evidence that leads one to believe that Oswald is much more than the public is being led to believe he is. If you go to the right column, the top, this is a result of a paraffin test the public never learned about until years later, pretty much given to everybody who commits a crime or is suspected to have committed a crime with a gun. And if it's a crime with a handgun, there will be nitrates on the hands. If it is a crime committed with a rifle, there will be nitrates on the shoulder area, the cheek, the neck area. They get blasted. These nitrates get blasted into your skin. You can't see them, but they're there for several days. In this case, the paraffin test was given to Oswald hours after the assassination. This is actually exculpatory evidence. We'll discuss that reason why. And then at the bottom there, an FBI report after they had paraded this gun around, this rifle, which they were starting to call the Oswald rifle, parading it in front of the media and up and down the halls of the Dallas Police Department. And this was photos were emerging of Oswald posing in the backyard with this alleged assassination rifle, and there were receipts found at his home for this rifle that he had purchased it, ordered it, had it sent to his P.O. box. And in large part, this rifle becomes a big chunk of the government's evidence against Lee Harvey Oswald. It was his rifle. We have proof with receipts. We found it at the 6th floor of the depository building, which is where he worked. That's where the shots came from. Thus, since his rifle was found at the scene, he committed the crime. And but there was a complicating factor. And this is more exculpatory evidence that we will discuss as we proceed along. Okay, so we're still on the timeline. And last we left off, Oswald has been spotted going into the Texas Theater. Talked about the assistant manager who said he came in at 1:07. And story about how the police ended up finding him there. A shoe store salesman said he saw a person who matched the description that was being blared out all over by radio, slinking along on the street, and then he disappeared inside the Texas Theater, and he went in without paying, which is interesting because the assistant manager said he paid. In fact, he took at 1:07, he took his money and he went in, and then he later came out and bought popcorn. But anyway, this shoe store salesman calls the cops, says, hey, there's somebody slinking along this street here, just went in the Texas Theater, kind of matches that description. And pretty much all of Dallas police descends on the Texas Theater. I mean, it's like they knew he was going to be there. But this is 1 hour and 20 minutes after the shooting, so we are now at 1:50, 50 minutes after JFK has been declared dead. And they go into the Texas Theater, they turn the lights on, and the manager points out Oswald. They close in on him, he jumps up, and he punches the cop closest to him. So they start tackling him. He pulls his 38 out and starts, this is according to the police now, he pulls his 38 out and starts trying to fire, but it malfunctions and just keeps clicking and clicking, but it's not actually firing. And meanwhile, he's yelling out, I am not resisting arrest. I am not resisting arrest. Which I've always wondered about that scenario, because the police say he struggled with the police while he was saying, I am not resisting arrest. When we learn later, in a later episode, what was supposed to go down in that theater, that scenario doesn't make sense. But remember, we're getting all this from the cops. So here he is being pulled out of the Texas Theater, and a big crowd has assembled outside, out front, and the word has gone around, this is the guy. And so there's a big crowd. It's kind of like Jesus being led. I hesitate to compare Lee Harvey Oswald to Jesus, but it's a mob. You remember the story in the Bible about the mob screaming at Jesus as he's being led to his crucifixion, an angry mob. Well, this is what happens. Oswald comes out, there's an angry mob, and the police are only too happy to, this is a feather in the cap if you're the Dallas police, because 1 hour and 20 minutes after the shooting, you've got your man. And so you want the public to know that. So you bring him out. You can see in this picture on the right, and he's being led to the cars there. So now he's in custody, and these pictures here show him in various stages where they'll take him into an interrogation room and interrogate him for a few hours, put him in a holding cell, bring him back out, interrogate him for a few hours, put him back in the holding cell. This just keeps getting repeated. And they're hoping that he will, he's cool as a cucumber. He won't say anything. Even to the point where when they look at his ID and there's two IDs, they're asking him, which one are you? He's real whimsical about that. He just will not, he's not acting like somebody who's terrified because he's just been arrested for the alleged assassination of the president of the United States and possibly a cop killing. Not acting like that at all. He's charged with the murder of Tippett, the cop, at 7:10 p.m. that evening, and then he's charged with the assassination at 1 a.m. the following morning, November 23rd. So from the shooting at 12:30 the previous day to two murder charges, capital murder charges, one an assassination of the leader of the free world, it's only been 12 and a half hours. So it appears that the crime of the century has been solved. And what the public is receiving as far as information corroborates that. The public believes he's the guy, and especially as this cover story that's been prepared in advance begins to drop, and his background begins to emerge, and the gun and the rifle, and then the 38. The people are being interviewed that knew him, and not painting a very good picture. Meanwhile, during one of these interludes, between interrogations, the Dallas police is happy to parade him up and down the hallways for the media to kind of get a look at him, shout questions at him. In one of these exchanges, Oswald says something that catches people's attention, and this is the nail in his coffin. They ask him if he shot the president. He says, "No, I did not shoot anybody." And they have arrested, this is a rough translation. He says, "They have arrested me because I used to live in Russia." And then he says, quote, "I'm just a patsy." Now, in those days, regular people didn't even know what that meant. A lot of folks were confused about what's a patsy. People had to kind of go look it up. What is a patsy? Patsy is a term that comes from Sicily. It's a mafia term. And in Sicily, they call it pazzo or passio, which is Italian for madman. And in mafia hits, they would set somebody up to be the fool or the madman, set somebody up to be the fall guy, and they would call him a pazzo or passio. So for him to use this term, especially when at the same time they're saying this guy's this lone nut, he's a frustrated guy, he's not very smart, but to use a term that a lot of people don't understand, especially a term that comes from the mafia world, in many people's minds that were connected to intelligence or to the mafia or to any kind of law enforcement, they were paying attention, and instantly that struck a chord with them, like he has a mafia connection at the very least. Furthermore, this has become an intelligence term. We're going to find out that during this period, the CIA, for example, has been working hand in hand with the mob for years, trying to kill Fidel Castro down in Cuba. And they've been like two heads of the same coin. And they have begun using this same method to conduct assassinations and hits and things of that nature, borrowing from the mafia, from Sicily, this term patsy. They've been doing the same thing. And so if they're in intelligence circles, you recognize the word patsy. If you're in the mafia, you recognize the word patsy. They've been doing it for years. And so for him to say that was like a little crack in the veneer, or the wall, so to speak, where Oswald was not saying anything, was not divulging any information that might help people understand who he was or what world he was coming from. But when he said the word patsy, that was a little indicator that he had connections to at least the mafia and American intelligence. And it's not proof, it's not definitive. It was just a very interesting choice of words. He could have said, I'm being set up, I'm being framed, I didn't do it, somebody else did it, they got the wrong guy. He could have said any number of things, but he said, I'm just a patsy. So that's a interesting choice of words, to say the least. When he was arrested, he was found with 2 IDs in his wallet. One of them was for Alex Heidel. As you can see on this ID on the far left there, he signed Alex Heidel, and then he had another one, Lee Harvey Oswald. And then the cop asked him, he says, which one are you? Oswald just shrugged at him and says, you're the cop, you figure it out. He says, he's not going to help. He's not answering even basic questions about who he is. He's not going to help. It's almost like he's been coached, like he understands what this is, and he's not going to be helpful in any way. The only thing he has said that publicly causes anybody to sit up and take notice is that I'm just a patsy. Now, this piece of evidence is why I brought up in a previous episode when the police said they found his wallet at the scene of the cop killing on the ground. They pulled it out and had 2 IDs in it, and then they lost the ID. And of course, the people that were there, the witnesses, they never saw a wallet. So it was the only people who ever, quote, saw a wallet or had a wallet in their hands that they said was Lee Harvey Oswald's wallet were the cops. The witnesses never saw it. And then when they arrested the suspect had his wallet on him. And of course, they had those 2 IDs. So a lot of questions about what about that wallet found at the JD Tippit crime scene. Was that, immediately, if you're paying attention, and of course a good defense attorney would bring this up. How do you account for 4 IDs, 2 wallets and 4 IDs? Which one is made up? Which one is real? And once you determine that the cops are planting evidence, that puts in doubt any evidence that they say they have. So a little interesting there. Now we're at 2:30. So this is 2 hours after the shooting. Shooting was at 12:30, hour and a half after JFK is ruled dead. And you can see here, famous picture, he's being loaded. His body's being loaded on the back of the plane for the takeoff. I use the word getaway in my notes because Texas law says a murder, a crime of this nature, the autopsy has to be done in the state before the body leaves. Murder is a state crime. It's not a federal crime. Assassinations were not distinguishable from regular murders, and so it should have been handled as a straight state crime issue. The autopsy should have been done by a Texas coroner, which would have done a lot to at least mitigate any thoughts about a conspiracy, because they didn't. The Secret Service, this is another move by the Secret Service, has aroused a lot of suspicion, basically just barged past the Texas authorities and dared them to do anything, and had their guns pulled, and they were going to shoot somebody if anybody tried to stop them. And they put the casket in this truck, and they took it to Air Force One, and they took it back to DC. Now, an autopsy that is performed in Texas will be performed by state authorities who are acting autonomously. They're not under anybody's direction. They're doing an autopsy for the state of Texas. But an autopsy, as we're going to discover in later episodes, performed in Washington, D.C. with military doctors, are under the direction of their superiors. And if there is a plot, if there is a conspiracy, they're going to be finding what their superiors tell them to find. And the autopsy is going to be rigged. So here we see we cannot allow for an independent investigation of this. It has to be handled in-house by our people. So they're taking, you see on that truck there, Jackie, still wearing her pink suit, splattered with blood. Standing next to her on our left, on her right, is Bobby, who has flown down from Dallas or from Washington to be with Jackie. They were very close. And her moment of need. And so moments later, we see LBJ in the front of the plane taking the oath of office. Now, he had called Bobby. Let me go back to this picture. This is you see Bobby here, and the reason Bobby is there, I misspoke. He did not fly down to Dallas. He made his way over to the Washington, D.C. airport, where the body is being this body is not being loaded into the plane. It's being unloaded from the plane. So I misspoke there. So that is why Bobby is there. Bobby met Jackie at the airport, and they are unloading the body from the plane into the hearse. They're going to take it to Bethesda for the autopsy. So I'll make that clear. That is why Bobby is there. Now, this is back in Dallas before the plane takes off. LBJ takes the oath of office, and he had called Bobby, who was the attorney general, and basically taunting him, saying, hey, before we take off, I think it'd probably be smart for me to take the oath of office and make it a public kind of display. And Bobby said, you don't have to do that. You're automatically the president. You don't have to take the oath of office. The vice president automatically assumes authority and control if the president is incapacitated or dead. And but he did that because A is a knife to stick in Bobby. And we'll get into the relationship between him and Bobby, and you'll understand why later he did that. But also, he wanted this photo. This is a photo, it's a famous photo. It's going to go out all across the world, basically. And it's got him standing next to Jackie. Now, Jackie was at the back of the plane when all this was being set up. She didn't want any part of this. She was sitting there literally in a folding chair next to the casket with her hand on the casket. And she didn't want to leave her husband's side. And she's got this dress. It's got blood stains all over. Nevertheless, LBJ talked her into it. Said, come on, come up here and stand next to me so that we can show the world this is a peaceful transfer of power. This is a legitimate government that's being sworn in. He called one of his favorite Texas judges, and she meets him on the plane, and they have the swearing in. And then afterwards, LBJ turns and begins receiving congratulations from all these are his people on the plane. Jackie goes back to the back of the plane and resumes her vigil next to her husband's body. Interesting thing happens 2 hours and 20 minutes after the shooting. So this is 2:50, almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The shooting was at 12:30, remember. According to testimony to the Warren Commission by Lieutenant Jack Revill, and remember, Jack Revill was the guy who originally gave the world the name Harvey Lee Oswald, because he was given the name by ONI, who was given the name by Army Intelligence. And he put it at the top of his list. If you remember, the list was alphabetized except for one name. Harvey Lee was at the top. These are all the people that were missing from the Texas School Book Depository who might be suspects. Right at the top was Harvey Lee Oswald, which, of course, out of alphabetical order, misapplied first name. He's got the first and second names reversed, and he's got an incorrect address. But, of course, Jack Revill doesn't know any of that. He's just writing down what he's being told. And the name obviously did not resonate with him. And you'll see why in just a second. He is approached in a basement parking garage in City Hall, and by a man named James Hosty. It turns out James Hosty works for the FBI. He's a special agent, and he had been sort of over Lee Harvey Oswald's file. Lee Harvey Oswald was a former, he lived in Russia for a couple of years, and there was some talk of him renouncing his citizenship and all this stuff, and he claimed he was a Marxist and all this stuff. So the FBI keeps track of people like that when they come back to the United States. So James Hosty was responsible for, accountable for, and in charge of the file, keeping tabs on Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, what we learned later is it's more than just keeping tabs. We've learned later that Lee Harvey Oswald was also an FBI informant. That was an arrangement for him to get back into the country. Bobby Kennedy, who's in charge of that kind of thing, said, well, if we're going to let you back in and not charge you with a crime, then you're going to have to do something for me. And the White House was having a terrible time figuring out what the CIA was up to. The CIA was doing all kinds of covert stuff behind the White House's back. No one would tell him what was going on. So he says, I need you to give me inside information on what the CIA is doing. In other words, you're going to be an informant for me. Now, that begs the question, why would he think that Lee Harvey Oswald had any inside information about what the CIA was up to? Trust me, we'll get to that. Nevertheless, he is an FBI informant. So Hosty and Lee Harvey Oswald have a relationship. And Hosty is, for public purposes, he is responsible to overlook or oversee Oswald. But privately, he's also the conduit of inside information that Oswald is giving the FBI on behalf of Bobby Kennedy. You remember now, it was a man named Lee who had given the anonymous tip to the Chicago FBI that there was an assassination plot 20 days earlier, November 2nd, in Chicago. Now, where did that information come from? It came from James Hosty. All right. Oswald gave the information to Hosty, and Hosty passed it up the chain. So Hosty knows more than he's letting on, but he says to Revill, he says, Jack, a communist killed President Kennedy. And Revill says, what? And Hosty says, quote, Lee Oswald killed President Kennedy. And Revill said, who is Lee Oswald? Now that is interesting because Revill's the guy that gave the name to the Dallas police. He's the first guy to write Harvey Lee Oswald at the top of his list. And now he's being asked, 2.5 hours later, he's being told that Lee Oswald killed the president. And all this, he's the guy who wrote the name first, and all this information is buzzing around. They've already arrested him. There's all, the public already knows his name, and Revill doesn't know who he is. Revill's like, who's Lee Oswald? That tells you that Revill did not independently on his own come up with the name Lee Oswald as a suspect. He was a vehicle by which military intelligence seeded that name into the Dallas police. Because if it had come from Revill, Revill would know who Lee Oswald was. He's the guy that I figured out is the suspect, but he didn't figure out he was the suspect. He was told a name, and he quickly wrote down the name and all this incorrect information, and boom, everybody ran with it. But it made no impression on him because he was not the guy who came up with that information. He was just a vehicle. So that's point number one about this conversation. It's interesting. Hosty says, well, he is in our communist file. We knew he was here in Dallas, which of course Hosty did. We had information that this man was capable of committing the assassination. Ooh, that's interesting. We had information that this man was capable. What this looks like is that Hosty is trying to get ahead of something. Because at some point, the public is going to learn that the FBI had a file on Oswald, and at the very least was negligent in its duty to keep tabs on him when the president of the United States was coming through his city. He's trying to get hold of it or ahead of this and say, well, we knew he was here. We knew he was capable of committing assassination. We knew he was a communist. And he's trying to put the best possible spin on this, that, we may have messed up by not watching him, because that's the best way you can spin that. Either way, it incriminates the FBI. It shows foreknowledge, as if Oswald was set up in advance to be the fall guy in Dallas, and the FBI knew it, and that's why they solved it so fast. Or it shows negligence, that they knew he was here and knew he was capable of it, and they just didn't do their job. That's the spin he's trying to put on it. He's trying to put the spin on it that the FBI just, messed up, and it was a mistake of negligence. What they don't want, what the FBI doesn't want people to know, is that it had foreknowledge, and possibly Oswald was being set up in advance to take the rap or be what he says the patsy. Now, the reason that I can say this pretty definitively is because 20 days earlier, they did the same thing, the exact same thing in Chicago. If you remember, they got a tip. It was an FBI tip. All right, so this was all FBI driven. and that there was a man, Thomas Arthur Valley, who was involved in an assassination plot to kill the president. And he was in an office building on the motorcade route, and they observed him with guns in his possession in his car and all this kind of stuff. This was before the White House canceled the trip, and they did not arrest him. They did not arrest him. Also in the tip was the revelation that there were 4 Cubans that were going to participate as assassins, and they watched those 4 Cubans, and they did not arrest the 4 Cubans. It wasn't until the White House canceled the trip and said, we're not coming. All of a sudden, they started making arrests. They arrested Thomas Arthur Valley. They arrested 2 of the 4 Cubans. One of them was turned out to be a known CIA assassin. The other turned out to be a known spotter for the assassin. The other 2 disappeared into the wind and were not seen again until Dallas 20 days later. As far as Thomas Arthur Valley was concerned, they released him hours later, and he was not seen again until like the 1980s when an author found him in witness protection. Now, what does all this say? Why did they wait? Why didn't they arrest him before? They could tell the Secret Service, hey, listen, we've made arrests. We've got all these people in custody. You don't have to cancel your trip. Everything's good. No, they just sat on the information and they watched these guys. And they didn't arrest them until after the trip was canceled, because you can't set somebody up for an assassination, in this case, Thomas Arthur Valley, if the trip is canceled and he never takes a shot at the president. You have to wait until the president comes, the motorcade happens, an assassination attempt happens, then you can set him up to be the patsy in the crime of the century. But of course, because the president never came, the crime of the century didn't happen in Chicago, so they didn't need their Chicago patsy. They didn't keep or hold on to their alleged assassins, the two Cubans that they had in their custody. They let them all go, and they just forwarded the plan basically to Dallas. And now the assassination has happened in Dallas, and so now they've arrested their patsy in Dallas, and Chicago is a dry run for Dallas. So when he makes this statement about, we knew he was here, we knew that he was capable of an assassination, all this stuff, he is just like Oswald when he says, I'm just a patsy. That is a clue about Oswald's background. This is a clue about the FBI's involvement. And of course, it's buttressed by the FBI official reaction to this statement that Revill claims Hosty made. Of course, they denied. They said he never, they basically called Jack Revill a liar. And in this article, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said, quote, "This is absolutely false. The agent made no such statement. The FBI did not have any such knowledge." And Revill was said later when they asked him about it, he said, well, quote, he was excited. Everyone was excited. He probably said some things he shouldn't have. My statement will stand. If it boils down to a swearing match, I had one of my men with me who can confirm what Hosty said. They can believe me if they want to or not. If they don't, I'm on record. So this is why the FBI had to deny this, because this, when taken in context with what happened in Chicago, shows the FBI knowing in advance in both cities that there was an assassination plot. Of course, we already know they knew about the one in Chicago because they themselves got a tip from their own informant. But they didn't make arrests until the trip was canceled, which they didn't have to do in Dallas because the motorcade went through, the assassination happened, and now they can make the arrest of the patsy. So this is an interesting little thing that if there had been a trial, this would have been a very intriguing little twist in the trial. All right, we're 3 hours after the shooting now. It's 3:30, and the Dallas police have searched Oswald's home, also his rooming house. And they claim that when they go into the garage to look for his gun, that all they find is an empty blanket. Now, we've already heard from Marina Oswald, who went into the garage minutes after the shooting and said that the gun was there and it was wrapped in a blanket. So we have a problem here. The police say the gun wasn't there. Marina says it was. This picture on the right are other pieces, evidence found on Oswald's properties, and also different places where he was known to visit and hang out. And some of this is pretty interesting stuff. I remember that camera that I showed you earlier, or itemized on that form. That camera is, if you see my cursor, it's up here. Okay, it's just lying here. It's a little silver eye. It kind of looks like a cell phone. Well, wouldn't you know it? Minutes later, after the Dallas police say they went into the garage and there was no gun there, it was just an empty blanket. Very iconic photograph here. The Dallas police produce a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, which they say is Oswald's, and he holds it up in the air for the media to look at and photograph, parades it up and down the hallway. It says, "This is what we found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. This is what they call the Oswald rifle." Now, they never produced this until after they searched his garage. Before they searched his garage, the gun that they found in the Texas School Book Depository, as we've already learned, as itemized by the 2 police officers who found it, was a German Mauser. All right. Oswald didn't own a German Mauser. So they didn't produce it. They didn't hold it up. They could have, but they didn't. They waited till after the search was completed at the Oswald garage, after which they claimed they looked for a gun but didn't find one. And then all of a sudden, they change the description of the gun that they found in the Texas School Book Depository from a German Mauser to a Mannlicher Carcano, and they produced this weapon after they searched his garage. I don't have to tell you what this looks like, okay? The German Mauser, that was documented. What happened to it? Where'd it go? Are you saying the Dallas, the police and the sheriff's deputy who found it didn't know the difference between a German Mauser and a Mannlicher Carcano? They were very explicit what they found. That gun was never seen again. All of a sudden, it became the Mannlicher Carcano, which Dallas police did not have possession of until they went to his garage. And then all of a sudden, they had a gun to produce. And they said they found it on the 6th floor. And of course, Marina has said, no, that gun was there. Somebody's lying. All right. Some of the evidence that was produced right off the bat was an advertisement that was found in Oswald's possessions, where he had underlined a couple things, details about the gun. He had circled on this sporting goods ad, this page, the Mannlicher Carcano and the 38 Special. He'd circled both of them. And here you see the details about this Mannlicher Carcano. It's not a high-velocity rifle. The Warren report says that JFK was killed by a high-velocity rifle shot. The Mannlicher Carcano is not high-velocity. In fact, it's not even a good rifle. In World War II, soldiers called it the humanitarian rifle because it was so notoriously, it had such poor aim. It never hit what you aimed at. So it saved everybody's life, whoever you were shooting at. It was a $2 gun, a $10 scope. According to the Warren Commission, they had to put 3 shims in the scope to line the scope up with the barrel. It was a piece of crap. All right, it's one of the worst rifles you could buy. German Mauser was a very good gun. And it's believable that you could have committed the crime and hit the president from that distance, moving target with a German Mauser, not with a Mannlicher Carcano. This is the receipt from Klein Sporting Goods, which was in Chicago. And you see the name. I've put a red box around it. A. Heidel. He orders this gun. And this is the purchase receipt. And this delivery is at the P.O. box that Lee Harvey Oswald set up in the name of A. Heidel. So this paper trail is pointing right back at Oswald. And then they find this photograph, allegedly, of Oswald posing in the backyard. Allegedly, Marina took this picture of him holding the Mannlicher Carcano in his left hand. The 38 is holstered at his right side, and his left hand, you can't make out what the literature is, but it was allegedly communist literature. And this is a picture of the assassin with the two weapons used to commit the crimes of November 22nd, 1963. All right, you've got the Mannlicher Carcano, which is the alleged assassination rifle. You've got the 38, which is the alleged cop killer gun that he used in the Oak Cliff neighborhood to shoot Officer Tippett. And the communist literature is just thrown in as extra to show that he's a communist. So which is supposed to be the motive why he did all this. He's a communist, so he kills the American president. There he is holding an assassination rifle. It's his. We've got the receipts to prove it. Here's a picture. There's the 38 on his side, which he used to kill the cop. Case closed. Both murder weapons on his possession. Another picture that was discovered was him when he was a United States Marine, and he was labeled a marksman. Now, that to the American people, to the layman, sounds like he was a very good shot. We're going to find out that the Marines has a way of distinguishing excellent shots from average shots from poor shots. And Oswald was never considered to be an excellent shot, not even a good shot. But nevertheless, they used the term marksman to describe him. And so, he's been in the United States Marine Corps. He was a marksman. Here's a picture of him training. There's another picture of him holding the weapons they used to commit the crimes. There's receipts. He ran. It looked like, that's the way it's portrayed after the crime. He left the Texas School Book Depository, ran to his rooming house, ran to the Texas Theater. The only reason he'd be running is because he's guilty of something. He shot the cop because, he was running for his life and he was trying to get away. And boy, it looks like an open and shut case. The cover story it's pretty impressive. This Life magazine cover, that photograph goes out. It's still the top selling Life magazine issue in its history. And that cover was an iconic cover showing Oswald posing there in his backyard. The National Insider, the seeds of an assassin were in him. And this is a story by a so-called buddy of his in the Marine Corps named Kerry Thornley. So they're going around and getting all these personality profiles from people who knew him. There on the left is the Klein's sporting goods ad I was telling you about. You see the top circle is of the Mannlicher Carcano. At the bottom is the circle of the 38 Special. Oswald allegedly made those circles, left the ad lying around in his rooming house or wherever it was found. So the picture being painted is that Oswald, this is an open shut case. This would be, easy conviction. How can you mess that up? And then we get to the paraffin test. The paraffin test, as I said, is a matter of routine. Anybody suspected of or alleged to have committed a crime using a gun or a handgun or a rifle is subject to a paraffin test to see the nitrates on the hands. Now, nitrates can be indicators of, gunpowder, which is blasted. If you're holding it up as a rifle, it'll be blasted into your cheek area, to your neck, to your shoulder. If you're just firing a handgun, it'll be in your hands, and it'll be. You won't be able to miss it. It won't be dots like this. It'll be big black areas all over your hand. Now, you can't see it; it's invisible, but the test reveals it. Then it eventually works its way out of the skin, but it's there. And as you can see, he's got small traces of nitrates on his hands, which is not proof that he fired a handgun. Remember, the police say that he was trying to fire his 38 when he was being arrested at the Texas Theater. But the paraffin test doesn't back that up. The traces are so slight, it could have been the boxes. Nitrates can be on your hands if you work with cardboard or you work with books that have ink on them. And that's what his job was. When he worked in the Texas School Book Depository, he moved boxes around. He stacked books. He put books in boxes. He'd pack and stuff. So The small traces of nitrates, but no gunpowder, no trace of gunpowder on his hands. That would have been up for debate in a court. You'd have to get experts in there and things of that nature. But the fact that he had no nitrates, no gunpowder on his cheek, his neck, or shoulder area, none, zero zip zilch, means that he had not, and this is definitive, he had not fired a rifle that day. Well, okay, that doesn't necessarily, that's exculpatory evidence. That's evidence that clears him. That's almost like having a alibi. I couldn't have fired a rifle. The assassination was a crime committed with a rifle. I couldn't have fired a rifle that day, as shown by the paraffin test. Of course, the public never hears about the paraffin test, right? We never hear anything. We hear about all the other evidence, but not the paraffin test. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't shoot the cop, okay? Because he had small traces of nitrates, but that would have been hard to convict him on because most people who fire, especially if you fire 4 times, and you would have had nitrates all over that right hand, but you can see he doesn't. And given the job that he has, it would have been a pretty easy way to explain that those dots of nitrates when you consider the job that he had. So that's why they didn't release the results of the paraffin test. It didn't back up their story, didn't back up the cover story. Another complicating factor was that J. Edgar Hoover comes out 24 hours later. The FBI has tested and tested and tested and tested every part of this rifle, trying to find fingerprints, and they can't find any. Hoover says, quote, no prints were developed on Oswald's revolver, which is the 38, the cartridge cases, the unfired cartridge, the clip, or the inner parts of the rifle. In other words, they can't find any of Oswald's prints on anything. Here's the actual report where he lists that out. So, all right, now, I mean, you still got enough evidence to show that the rifle belongs to him. It's going to be tough to if you get to a trial, to prove that that's the rifle you found at the 6th floor, because Marina is going to be on the stand saying, no, it was in my garage. And those officers are going to be on the stand saying, no, it wasn't a Mannlicher Carcano, it was a German Mauser. That's going to be a problem. The receipts help you, right? The picture, the backyard photo helps you, but you can't see in that photo that it's an actual Mannlicher Carcano. It's a rifle, but you don't know for sure which is. A good defense attorney could say, well, that was a German Mauser he was holding. You can't really see that. You can't see the 38. The receipts help you immensely, as far as, because he was found with an Alec Heidel ID, and both purchase receipts for the 38 and for the rifle were shipped to an Alec Heidel, the P.O. box. And so that ties him to the rifles, but they've got some problems. No fingerprints and no proof that it was on the 6th floor. Then we get to this. This is the call slip. It was uncovered not until 1975. So here you're talking about 12 years later. People don't know about this till 12 years later. And I began today talking about this. It's a collect call. You get that one call in the jail. You see the name, Lee Harvey Oswald, and you see the city where the call is going, and you see the person. His name is John Hurt. This actually happened the next day. He didn't get that phone call till a day and a half after, 10:45 at night. So it's about a day and a half after he's been arrested. He makes what they call the Raleigh call. Who is this John D. Hurt? John Hurt. Turns out John Hurt is a counterintelligence who's with counterintelligence in the Army during World War II. And he is stationed in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is real close to Nag's Head, which is where they have a big training base for our fake defector program. The fake defectors were a CIA program to sneak spies into the Soviet Union by having them claim they were defectors, and they would go over there and become agents for the CIA, but they pretended like they were defectors. Well, when we get to the background of Lee Harvey Oswald, he defected to the Soviet Union after he left the Marine Corps, pretended like he was a defector, stayed here for a couple of years, married a Russian woman, and came home. I'm going to give you just the real scaled down version today. Later, we'll get into it in depth. If he was a fake defector, like many people suspect, not a real defector, but he was a CIA spy sent acting as a fake defector to Russia and then came back. Think about it. If you defect during the middle of the Cold War to the Soviet Union and you claim that you say you're going to renounce your American citizenship and you say you're going to give military secrets to the Russians, you better stay in Russia. Don't come home to America. You'll be charged with treason unless you have some sweetheart deal going on with the government where you can come back and never face any kind of trial for that. That's what happened. When Oswald returned, it was like nothing ever happened. I submit he was a fake defector. All right. He was sent there by the CIA, which is why, when he uses the term patsy, he's using that term because he's in intelligence. He understands what that term means. Okay. Anyway, it was standard operating procedure. If you are in trouble and you are in the CIA, you're an agent in the field and you get arrested or something happens, you're in trouble, you are supposed to call your cutout, who is somebody who forwards that message for you to the case, to your case officer, so they can make arrangements to either get you out of trouble or whatever it is the CIA decides to do with you. They might even disown you or claim they don't have any association with you, whatever. But this is standard CIA procedure. So instead of, when he gets the opportunity to make a call, instead of calling his mom, instead of calling a relative, instead of calling an attorney, he calls his cutout, the person he's supposed to call, who's going to forward the message to his case officer. And in other words, he follows procedure. And the lady who wrote this call slip threw it in the trash. Afterwards, she just threw it in the trash because the call did not go through. And it was somebody later who came back and pulled it out of the trash. Otherwise, we'd never know about it. And when you find out who John Hurt is and who he called, you realize, holy smoke, this guy is connected to American intelligence. He's calling the place where they do the training for these fake defectors, which he was in 1959. He was a fake defector. So he's calling basically his superior officers that trained him to be a fake defector. He's training them, or he's calling them, say, hey, I'm in trouble. I'm following procedure here. Now, in doing so, he is essentially signing his own death warrant because the CIA is certainly not going to claim Lee Harvey Oswald at this point. It's gone off the rails. They're going to disavow him, and he's going to be eliminated as a problem. But he is following procedure, and so this is a huge chunk of evidence. Of course, it doesn't come out till 1975. So any connections that Oswald may have had to intelligence before 1975 would be without this piece of evidence. This is a huge piece of evidence here, the Raleigh call slip. So a few interesting things. Exculpatory evidence. Exculpatory evidence is evidence that your defense attorney would provide in court that clear you. Well, we just talked about several. We talked about the paraffin test. He didn't fire a rifle. It was definitive. He did not fire a rifle. Okay, that's exculpatory. You can't even charge him with murder. I mean, that goes away when you have a test that definitive that says he did not fire a rifle. No fingerprints on the rifle. All right, that is a complicating factor. The story that this Manicure Carcano was not in the garage. Marina says it was. The story that the Manicure Carcano was found in a Texas school book depository, but the two officers said no, it was a German Mauser. The Raleigh call slip. Oh, wait a second. Who is this guy? Why would he call American intelligence instead of a family member or an attorney? The Minox camera I started off today telling you about, that was a spy camera. It wasn't even on the market. You could not buy, it was not publicly available. You could not purchase a Minox spy camera. The only entity that had Minox spy cameras was intelligence agencies. In fact, that's who the company made the cameras for. It was not publicly available. So how does Oswald have in his possession a Minox spy camera? One that you cannot go down to Best Buy and buy. You can't buy it anywhere. It is only available if you are on the inside in an institution like the CIA. So there are some pieces of evidence that are beginning to emerge, at the very least, to cast in doubt Oswald's guilt, i.e. the paraffin test, and Oswald's identity, i.e. the Raleigh call slip, the Minox camera, things of that nature. So this is why it's going to come as great relief the next day when Jack Ruby does everybody a favor, at least those who are trying to perpetrate a cover story that Oswald acted alone and he was just this lone nut loser. When Jack Ruby cleans up that mess and kills him and there's no trial, none of this has to be presented and none of it has to stand up to a defense attorney's counterpoints or closer examination. There's no jury that's going to hear all this and start to think, not sure that story is true that you're telling me. So Oswald's going to die, sort of like this mythical figure, and the evidence that is going to be publicly or publicized to the American people, published to the American people, is going to be all the incriminating stuff. But the evidence that could have cleared him doesn't come out till years later. It just sort of dribbles out. And by that time, the die is cast. And the American people are already convinced, oh, it's Oswald. It's in the history books. It's in all the movies. It's what the government said. And goes back to my original, one of those quotes that I have on my channel, Mark Twain. Some people say he didn't say it, but I attribute it to him. He says, a lie goes around the world before the truth gets out of town. So what we're learning in the days and weeks after the assassination, and right now, all we've been is hours after the assassination, is all the evidence that convicts him. But the evidence that clears him is starting to dribble out even then. And of course, more so in the weeks and months and years afterwards. Okay, I went on a little long today. I apologize for that, but I want to make sure and be very clear on every detail as we go through this. So this was episode 9. And again, if you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe. It's free. Feel free to hit the notification bell. I try to drop material 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes more. Sometimes I get going and I get in a rhythm there. But and then if you like it, please feel free to hit the thumbs up, leave a review, whatever. And until next time, everybody have a great weekend. Thank you.